We have on activity 43, we have the statement of cash flows for Southwest Airlines. And just a quick question, how many people here have flown on Southwest Airlines? Just you and me? Anyone else? Southwest Airlines? Who? You have? So what is it about Southwest Airlines? What's the story with them? Is it like other airlines?
Does it only fly in the sun?
No, it's all over this. Fly to Newark. They're a very unusual strategy for an airline. I don't know if you haven't flown them. I went to school in Austin, Texas, and Austin was a hub for Southwest, so everybody down there knew it. And in fact, the idea of Southwest Airlines was originally their headquarters are in Dallas, and the idea was that they're not there to compete with the other airlines, but rather they're competing with bus service, buses and driving. So rather than driving from Dallas to Houston or something like that, you can fly, and it's less expensive. And so the service itself is they run it as best as they can, more like a bus service than a plane service. So there are no reserved seats. You have to, when you get there, they tell you the order that you can get on. They have this weird boarding system. I don't know. The idea is they want to turn the planes over as quickly as possible. You know how we talked about turnover before? We said that with turnover, what you want to do is you want to use your assets as productively as possible. That should certainly work with an airline. With the planes, you want to use your planes as productively as possible. So they figured out that when the plane is sitting on the ground, it's not making any money. So the more they can keep the planes in the air, the more money they can make. So the idea is they want to get the plane, land the plane, get the passengers off the plane, get the new passengers back on the plane as quickly as humanly possible. And they're really quite irritating when they do it, because they literally move you onto the plane like cattle, and they just push you on, and here, sit wherever you want, and all of this, but get on the plane now, because we're taking off, and get out of the. They're really fast, the way they flip the planes over and they flip the gates over, because that's how they make money. So when you think about it, by utilizing your assets as productively as possible, you can make more money. This is a high turnover strategy, not a high price strategy. Price-wise, they want to keep the prices. Most airlines, and we know this because we live in New Jersey, there's really just one what's the one airline that flies out of Newark Airport pretty much? They're like 2.5 out of 3 terminals. Yeah, it's United Continental, right? It used to be Continental and now it's United. And so if you fly in and out of Newark, you pretty much have to use United now. So what that airline does is that's a high price strategy, because then what they say to the people in the neighborhood is like, okay, you want to fly to Newark Airport, you got to use us, and we're going to charge you for it. And they really take advantage of it. There's a certain level of monopoly power that they have. And if you don't want to fly United, then there's like a half a terminal that belongs to all the other airlines. And so those airlines compete on convenience, and they charge more money for it. So like if you're a business flyer, for example, and you don't book your ticket 3 weeks in advance, you need to book a ticket at the last minute, you could pay over $1,000 for an airfare. Or if you're going to an airport that doesn't have much service, so if you're going from, say, Newark to one of the smaller airports in the area, then again, you're really going to get taken for a ride, so to speak, and have to pay a very high airfare. That is a high pricing strategy, product differentiation strategy. Whereas Southwest Airlines says we want to keep our prices as low as possible, because we're not really competing with the other airlines, we're competing with driving. So instead of driving to Buffalo, I don't know if Southwest goes to Buffalo, but instead of driving to Buffalo, we'll fly you there, and it won't cost you much more money than that. So that's who they consider their competition to be. So what you have is a high turnover, low price strategy. It's very unusual. I'm trying to think of, oh, this is another thing they do to save money. It's pretty cool. They only fly one kind of plane. So they only fly 737s. That's it. Because this cuts down on their maintenance costs. This way, all their planes are the same, and it's very easy. It's easier for them to manage their schedule. They only have to maintain one kind of plane, and therefore the whole system runs very smoothly. By the way, just so you know, anyone here ever fly JetBlue? So yeah, I love JetBlue. And JetBlue is modeled after Southwest, and the founder of JetBlue was like executive vice president of Southwest or something, and then he left there and started JetBlue. So JetBlue does a lot of things that Southwest does. It just has, the planes are a little nicer. That's really the only difference. I mean, they fly to different places also. They use a different, they have two kinds of planes on JetBlue. But anyway, and this is the other thing, that Southwest found that the large international airports are much more difficult to get in and out of than smaller airports. So Newark Airport is an unusual airport for Southwest Airlines. What they usually try to do is fly in and out of a smaller airport in the area so they can get the planes landed, disembarked, reloaded, and then take off again much more quickly. So Southwest Airlines, for example, in Dallas, doesn't fly out of Dallas-Fort Worth International, DFW. It flies out of Love Field, which is a much smaller airport than DFW. But it's just as well with the customers because their airports tend to be more centrally located. So Love Field is much closer to the city of Dallas than Dallas-Fort Worth International. So they usually try to fly in and out of smaller airports, and JetBlue kind of does that also. And again, that allows them to utilize their resources much more productively. So if you utilize your resources more productively, you know that's a high turnover strategy. Okay, that's Southwest Airlines. Anyway, we're talking today about the cash flow statement. And let me give you some idea of what the cash flow statement does for us. The idea of income, we talked about accrual income. And accrual income is a great thing because it measures net income. But remember how complicated it was to determine when you have a revenue and when you have an expense. Remember that you have revenues when they're earned and received or receivable. In other words, you can't record a revenue until you actually do whatever you're supposed to do to earn that revenue. Likewise, you record expenses when you get the benefits from those expenses based on what we call, the matching principle. So then we get revenues minus expenses equals net income, and that's considered to be a pretty good measure of performance. The problem is that it's not necessarily cash flow, because we said that you might record revenue at one time, but the cash comes in at a different time. And the same thing with expenses. You might record an expense in one period, but you don't have to pay for it in the same period. It might be paid for in a different period. So what this means is that even though revenues and cash inflows are similar, and expenses and cash outflows are similar, they may happen at different times. And what this means for us is that cash flow is not necessarily the same as income. One of my professors, he had a really great line for this. He said, you can't put profits in the bank. It sounds, but why can't you, at first thought? But it's really true. You could have a company that's profitable, but that doesn't have cash flow. In that case, a company that's profitable that doesn't have cash flow has a big problem.
Doesn't that kind of defeat the purpose? So if you don't get any cash flow, despite being successful in this.
Yeah, it completely defeats the purpose. So let's say you make sales and they're very profitable sales, but you don't collect the money quickly from your customers and you run out of cash flow. Well, if you don't have any cash in the bank, then you can't really do business anymore. And cash is kind of like water. Like if a person stops drinking water, they could die. And it's the same thing for a company. If a company doesn't have enough cash to pay its bills, then it can't function. It will be bankrupt and it will close. So you always want to make sure that a company has enough cash flow to continue to run its operations successfully. Now, let's look at a basic cycle. When you're running a business, the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to need cash. So you're going to go to the owners of the business and you're going to find out, you're going to raise money from them. They're the owners of the business and they're going to invest so and so many dollars into the business. And that's going to be your first cash flow, money that comes in from the owners. That's called financing cash flows. Likewise, you might borrow a little money from the bank, and that would also be a financing cash flow. So cash flows that come in from long-term liabilities and stockholders' equity are called financing activities. And that's how you start your business. The next thing, now that you have money in the bank, you're starting a business, now that you have money in the bank, the next thing that you're going to do is you're going to invest it in assets. So let's say you're going to start up, I don't know, a water, this is the biggest scam, $1.75 for a freaking bottle of water. And it's tap water. It probably says it here. Let's see. Bottled under the authority of Embotelado Bajo Autoridad de PepsiCo. Oh, it doesn't tell you here. Yeah, purified drinking water. This is just tap water that went through a filter. And then they charge you $1.75 for it. So anyway, let's say I'm going to open a water bottling company. So what I need to do now is I need to invest in water bottling equipment. So like, I guess all kinds of plumbing and stuff. I have to build a plant that's going to do this. And so I'm going to invest my capital and the money I borrowed into this factory. And that's an investing activity. So first we had financing activities, then we had investing activities. Now finally we have operating activities. My factory goes into operation and I start making bottled water. And I start selling it. Now I have operations and now I have operating activities. So first thing to do is get your capital. That's financing. Second thing to do is to invest it. That's investing activities into productive assets. And then the third thing to do is to start making money. That's operating activities. And that is the order that you run your business. Now, as you make money, what are you going to do with that cash? You might reinvest it in more equipment. That would be investing activities. Or you might start giving it back by paying off debt or paying interest on debt. And also paying off your common stockholders with dividends. And that's going to be financing activities. So eventually, once the company gets running, you're going to have all three kinds: operating, investing, and financing. Let's talk about these different kinds of cash flows for a moment. I'm going to start at the bottom. We have what are called financing cash flows. Examples of cash inflows or financing activities are borrowing cash from your creditors, issuing debt securities, and issuing equity securities. Those are cash inflows. Cash outflows are financing activities. We pay amounts borrowed, we purchase equity shares, and pay cash dividends. Then I have my investing activities. With investing activities, I have cash outflows. That would be buying, purchasing property, plant, and equipment. Another word for capital expenditures. Purchasing securities, that's like stocks and bonds and stuff, and making loans to others. Whereas cash inflows is selling property, plant, and equipment, selling investment securities, and receiving loan repayments. Then finally, operating activities. These are items, oh, and one other thing to say here, financing activities are very similar to, are usually related to, they're related to non-current liabilities and stockholders' equity.